Hello? Well, hello and welcome. My name is Caleb Wilkins. These are my colleagues Landon Frost, Ransom Storm, and Michaela Hoffman. We had the privilege this year of working with Rick Day and his company, Advantage Precast. So a little bit about Advantage Precast. They are categorized as a concrete wholesale business, and they've been in business for over 20 years. They provide products throughout Oregon, Washington, California, and even Hawaii, but they are willing to ship anywhere in the United States if necessary. So they offer a variety of products ranging from retaining walls to burial and drainage systems. And the thing about their products is that they are made from precast concrete. What that means is that each of their products is preformed and produced at their facilities in Kaiser. And so from there they are shipped to their customers and then placed. So this differs from regular building of a structure in that it is quick and it is clean. Usually if you build a structure, it can take days to weeks, and it's just kind of a time where there can be kind of an eyesore of an unfinished product. So this just allows customers to get it shipped and then placed, and essentially the structure is done. So over the past couple years, Advantage Precast has noticed that there's been a saturation in the market for many of the products that they offer. What this means is that new businesses are coming into the market, and businesses that are already in the market are growing. And this presents a problem for Advantage Precast because it means that competition for many of their products is getting much more difficult. So what Advantage Precast is looking to do is to expand their product offering and come up with new products that maybe their competitors don't offer, and that customers would still be willing to buy. So in doing this, Advantage Precast came up with the idea of precast baseball dugouts. Now they came up with this idea because they just noticed that locally at parks and local high schools, a lot of dugouts seem to be pretty worn down or rotting if they are made out of wood, and could use either upgrades or just full replacement. So they thought that maybe precast dugouts could be one of those products that not many of their competitors offer, but that customers would still be willing to buy. So after talking to a few minor league teams and looking at some of the dugouts that they had, they came up with this layout that you see on the screen. As you can see, there's a few different amenities offered, such as an optional drain, optional benches, and a few other things. And one thing that we noticed right off the bat was that the roof is flat. That's probably one thing that we would recommend be changed, simply because in Oregon and Washington it rains so much, and a slanted roof would allow water to drain off of the back instead of spilling over on all four sides. But that's just one small thing, and that's the product that Advantage Precast tasked us with. And with it, they gave us a few objectives. Number one was to analyze and do market research on the target markets. So this is anyone who's interested or would be interested in buying precast dugouts. And it includes minor league baseball teams, colleges, high schools, and then parks and recreation. And then from that data that we gathered, we were essentially to either recommend that yes, they do introduce this product to their product line, or no, they should focus their efforts on another product, one that would maybe be more beneficial to their company. Next, Landon Frost is going to talk about some of the market research and observations that we made throughout this process.
Thank you, Caleb. Before I start, I will pass this to Griff, who will show the judges kind of the general idea of what the dugouts look like. That's Rick's kind of rough model that he takes to trade shows. So, as Caleb was talking about, our team wanted to focus on 4 target markets, being minor league facilities, college facilities, high school facilities, and little league organizations. We decided to eliminate minor league facilities right off the bat. With the knowledge that we have being student athletes, minor league facilities did not have a market for these dugouts. Because their facilities were already in place, the stadiums already had dugouts. We also eliminated colleges right off the bat because, again, just like minor league facilities, we didn't see a market for the dugouts because they were already established with dugouts. So as a group, we decided to focus on high school and little league organizations. In Oregon and Washington alone, there's about 1,500 high schools and 250 little league organizations, roughly. Out of the 1,500 high schools, we observed about 30% of those needed dugout upgrades. And about 40% of the Little League organizations needed dugout upgrades. So right off the bat, Salem and Kaiser Little League organization we focused on to see if there was a target or there was a market for these dugouts. We noticed that Little League organizations had a need for these dugouts. The only problem was they couldn't afford the price point that our client estimated the dugouts would be. Now, the need for the dugouts, Little League organizations, like Caleb talked about earlier, the reason why is because they had damaged because of the weather. A lot of them were made out of wood and they were vandalized. So that was a huge thing that they said they would need, but again, the price point was a little higher than they wanted. So we focused 100% on high schools for this market. After eliminating Little Leagues, we decided to cold call high schools from Eugene to Portland. And when we did cold call, we noticed that there was kind of a lack of need for dugouts. And again, a lack of affordability, just like the Little League organizations. The price point, again, was a little higher than what they wanted. And so, again, the lack of affordability wasn't there. So we decided to come up with an alternative product that we thought would be a little exciting to bring into the market that had a similar target market being sports and a similar structure to the dugouts as you guys seen. Concession stands. So after talking with Rick, we pitched him the idea of concession stands in our last meeting with him. And what was cool is he was actually right on board with us with this idea and had this already drawn out, ready for us right when we got there. So it was cool to get on the same page with him that when we pitched this a new idea, that he already had this structure already drawn out as you see on stage, or on the screen, sorry. So again, there's a similar market to the concession stands, being sports, and it also can go into other organizations. Concession stands are not just for baseball and softball, obviously. It can be football, soccer, it doesn't matter. Concession stands are there's a huge market compared to the dugouts. These concession stands, as you can see, have windows, doors, and they can also have power outlets inside of them that Rick and Advantage Precast can install on site. So once they're all done, they can ship the concession stands to the location, wherever that is, ready to go for them to start using it. Now, if the high school decides, well, you know, I don't want the windows, doors, and power outlets, that's fine. Rick can ship the structure by itself to the location of the high school, and then they can come up with people to do the doors, windows, and power outlets. And we noticed that some high schools wanted to do that too. So again, after doing some observations, roughly about the 1,500 high schools in Oregon and Washington, we saw that about 463 needed dugouts, and out of the 1,500, about 579 needed concession stands. Now, with that, the big one was affording, like I said earlier, with only 154 potential high schools being able to afford the dugouts at the price point they're at, but 386 high schools could afford the concession stands with the price point that they were at. So we saw that the need and the affordability of the concession stands were greater than the dugouts. Now I'll pass the mic over to my friend Ransom, who will do the financial aspects.
Thank you, Landon. For the financial portion of our project, we took a look at three things for both the dugouts and the concession stands in order to compare the two products as well as determine a final recommendation for our client. These three things were profit margins, revenue projections, and a break-even analysis, all of which we will briefly examine today. The first thing that we'll take a look at is the profit margins for the dugouts. Our client established a price point of about $3,500, shipping included, per 8-foot section of a dugout. He also provided us with a standard costing worksheet that totaled the costs of materials, labor, and equipment that gave us our total cost of production of about $1,800 that you see on the screen in red. This results in a profit of about $1,700 per 8-foot section. Now, from the research that we did, we found that the average high school baseball or softball dugout is about 24 feet in length. Now, based on these numbers, the price point for one pair of dugouts is about $20,000. The total production cost is about $11,000, and this results in a profit of about $9,000 before desired amenities. Next, we'll be taking a look at the profit margins for the concession stand. As a group, we came up with a competitive price point of about $8,000 per unit. This price point was based on the research that we did on the cost of other concession stand facilities, both permanent and portable. The great thing about this unit is that it can be produced for just about the same production cost as one 8-foot section of the dugout. This then results in a profit of about $6,000 per unit for the concession stand. So based on these numbers, we put together a revenue projection for both products. Now, since these are brand new products and a new market for our client, these are conservative projections that are based strictly on the research, data, and feedback that we received from our cold calling and the surveys that we also sent out. As you can see, we project that Advantage Precast will sell 0 dugouts in the first year, 1 dugout in the second year, 1 dugout in the third year. It'll jump to 2 dugouts per year in years 4 and 5. And by year 6, we should see a consistent number of sales at 3 dugouts per year, resulting in a yearly revenue of about just under $30,000 and a total revenue of $115,000 after the 7th year. For the concession stand 7-year projection, we noticed right away that the results were better not only yearly, but in total after the 7th year. As you can see, we project 1 sold concession stand in the first year, 2 sold in the second year. We'll jump up to 3 per year in years 3 and 4. The 5th year, there will be 5 sales. And by the 6th year, we should see a consistent number of sales at 7 concession stands per year, resulting in a yearly revenue of $33,000 and a total revenue of about $145,000 after the 7th year. From this, we were able to conclude that high schools have a much more pressing need for concession stands than they do dugouts. This brings us to our break-even analysis that we did. As you can see, the blue line represents the total revenue and the red line represents the total cost. As well as you can see that the break-even point takes place at 13 units sold and about $300,000 in total sales. Now, if you think back to our 7-year projection for the dugouts, that should take place somewhere in year 8. Also, take note of the profit margin after break-even point. Now, for our concession stand break-even, right away you notice that the profit margin is much larger after break-even, and it continues to be that way. We have our break-even point taking place at 20 units sold and about $150,000 in total sales. Again, looking back at our 7-year projection, that should take place somewhere in year 6, which is 2 years sooner than that of the dugouts. Now, from our profit margins, revenue projections, and our break-even analysis, we're able to conclude that the concession stand market is not only a faster growing one, but also a more profitable one. This concludes the financial portion of our presentation, and I'll now be passing the microphone to Michaela Hoffman, who will bring us home with our final recommendations and conclusions.
Thank you, Ransom. There are around 154 high schools in the Pacific Northwest that are able to afford dugouts. There are around 386 high schools that are able to afford concession stands, both within the next 7 years. That being said, according to our research, we believe that there is more money to be made by selling concession stands. Dugouts take a long time to build, it costs more to ship, and it comes out of one sports budget. And there is no return on the investment. Concession stands, on the other hand, are quick to build, they're easy to transport, They come out of multiple sports budgets, making it more affordable for the high schools, and it gives a consumer a chance to make a return on their investment. Since Advantage Precast already has a multi-purpose building that can act as a concession stand, it will be an easy transition and a good market to pursue. By selling concession stands, it may lead to future sales in the dugouts due to the relationship that will be built between our client and the high schools, and it will get his foot in the door for the market of athletic facilities. We strongly believe that these recommendations will increase the growth and the success of Advantage Precast. We would like to thank Rick Day, Advantage Precast, for giving us the opportunity to work with them. We would like to thank our community mentor, Nick Williams, and our professors for helping us through this process. Thank you. We're open for questions.
Okay, judges. I've got a question on the costs. I'm confused, and you don't need to explain how you came up with the costs, but are you sure that your costs are correct between an 8-foot section of a dugout and a quite a bit larger concession stand?
Yeah, the concession stand unit is pretty flexible in terms of the size, and when we asked our client about the production costs, he told us that it was about the same production cost for the concession stand as it would be for the 8-foot section of the dugout.
Go ahead, Richard.
Could you talk, please, about the breakdown between fixed costs and variable costs on these units? It looked like from your graph that there was a large startup cost, maybe $100,000 to get started in this business. Talk about fixed versus variable.
Well, the fixed costs that we added into that were based on, we mentioned that in our report, is that we recommended that if Rick happens to take on this project, that he hire a salesperson to take on this job. And so we added all that into fixed costs as well as what he gave us. So that would be the salary and the phone bill and the car, the gas, all that stuff. So we added that into fixed costs as well as what Rick gave us as far as fixed costs go. Variable costs were the materials, the labor, the equipment, all of that stuff. And that was all added in.
How did you develop the projected sales, your 7-year forecast?
Yeah, so as I explained, that was all based on the data that we received. So in our surveys and our cold calling that we did, which that is also in our report, we sent out these surveys that asked when would be a reasonable time for the schools, and based on that is kind of how we based our 7-year projection.
What was your response rate? What kind of data pool did you have for the high schools or schools you contacted?
As far as?
Well, you did surveys.
Right.
Did 10 reply or did 1,000?
We didn't have a whole lot of replies, so that's why we went into the cold calling. And like Landon said, we cold called every high school that we could find on the OSAA website from Eugene to Portland. And we asked the same questions in our cold calling.
Chad?
As far as a product question for you, did you guys look at some of the advantages to the structures versus wood or steel? I would have liked seen something as far as, is there appearance options? I would think that they're going to last longer, but did you look at those things?
Yeah, well, again, like I talked about earlier, the biggest thing that we saw with wood and what Rick does with Advantage Precast is, again, the Little League facilities, if you go out to Kaiser, they have 12 dugouts that are wood, and they've replaced them over like 5 years 5 times because of the wood being deteriorated and people coming and destroying them. So with the concrete, it gives them no chance to destroy them because that's pretty hard to destroy concrete. And the vandalism, what's nice about what Rick was talking about too is when we put if we put an 8x8 section into the Little League facilities, let's just say as an example, with a vandalism or anything like that, they can paint over and it's an easy fix rather than the wood being damaged really quick and having to replace all of that product all over again. So I hope that answers your question. Okay.
We also looked at as far as the concession stands go, the concession stand can be placed in one spot and can be one central location for multiple sports. And a lot of schools, I mean, Corbin, for example, has trailers, which in the off season, they can't necessarily stick things like barbecues or equipment in there. And with a precast concession stand, they could have a steel door on it, shut it, lock it, and that's good protection for all of that equipment during the off season.
How much capacity were they able to do? Like you were saying, at 7 years, they had, how many was it?
7 concession stands.
7 concession stands.
3 dugouts.
So, say they hire in a salesperson, at what's their capacity once they reach their goal at 7 years? Is it quite a bit more than that? Like in-house, can they make, how many of these can they make?
As far as they can, as build time and
right.
As much as they can store. Well, for one 8-foot section of dugout, I know that the labor time is about 20 hours. And so that's a pretty good turnaround rate as far as getting it done and out to the client. And so that's all we looked into that as far as that goes.
Dave?
If I may ask 2 questions since I have the mic. First of all, I think you did a great job arriving from the dugout to the concession.
Thank you.
I thought that was great. So my first question is, in your sales projection, was that Oregon only, or did you go and forecast that into their other markets and potentially nationally, 7 years out? Would be my first question.
Well, we weren't tasked with looking into national projections, but we did. That was based strictly on the cold calls that we did for Oregon and Washington. So, okay. Or for Oregon is what I meant. So we didn't even necessarily look at Washington for that. And we're basing those, like Landon said, we had 1,545 high schools in both. And so we based our projections into that number.
Okay. And then my second question, the dugout is more of a finished product than the concession stand, because the concession stand is going to need windows and roof and those kind of things.
Correct.
Did you guys discuss amongst your team and your mentors at all about potentially teaming with, there's some local companies like Blazer Industries and Modular Building Systems to maybe team to provide a complete product?
Yeah, from what we understood, I think Rick said that they do team with other companies to do that and to get that done. But also, like Lennon said, the high schools can have that contracted and do that themselves to avoid higher costs and stuff.
Rick also mentioned to us that if they needed to, they could add all of these amenities into the concession stand if they needed to. But just for the sake of costing, we just did kind of like the blank concession stand just for basic costing, because those things will cost more or less depending on what customers want.
And I'll jump in on that too. Also, we noticed that a lot of the dugouts, when we called the high schools and asked them, price points and everything with amenities, a lot of them had mom and pop companies that say, hey, I'll take this on, I'll do it for free, why not? And get the amenities, the windows, the doors. So that was kind of an aspect that we kind of saw too with cold calling, that a lot of these high schools had, again, mom and pop kind of companies that would do it for them for free.
Jonathan?
So firstly, your slides are beautiful, really well done, they're exemplary. And as an academic exercise, this is very interesting, but my challenge is with the elephant in the room, which is the conclusion that you arose. Because I can't understand why you didn't say to your client, I really think you should take up coaching golf or another Corbin sport, because this doesn't make sense. Why didn't your conclusion lead to you to fire the salesman? Because it took 7 years to get to break even, and such a small market. Or why didn't you say to your client, if you can do this effectively nationally, then this could be a good revenue stream and it would stand out. I'm interested in why, from a business analysis, you came to the conclusion they should proceed with the alternative?
I'll try to start it for us.
That's a good last question, too.
So what was cool about when Rick brought this to us, again, us being all student athletes, it was kind of it brought kind of memories for all of us and gave us something to really get into. What we thought was that this gives, like Caleb was talking about, it gives Rick a different target market than any other precast company nationwide. And it gives him, we kind of thought of the idea of bringing in concession stands and dugouts and making a sports line for precast. And maybe even increasing and going into other aspects of sports and making a whole product line of sports. So that's kind of why I guess we didn't shut it down, as you would say, because we think that there is a potential of other projects and products that he could have a whole sports line that can get nationwide, and yeah, so that's all I got.